right, let's see. Got Algebra 2 lecture, 1026 and 1027, OSA 2A11. The student will complete the square and factor the resulting quadratic trinomial. And it'll be a square of a binomial when we get done with that. The instructions here are complete and rewrite as the square of a binomial. That's what we'll get if we factor the resultant quadratic trinomial. What we're going to do, oops, I'm communicating with my computer. Let's see here. That might do it. There we go. We're going to complete the square and make a trinomial, and then we're going to factor that trinomial, and that will be the square of a binomial. That's what we're shooting for. So here we go. Complete the square and rewrite as the square of a binomial. To complete the square, all we do is we take half of the coefficient of the linear term. That's the term where the power of the variable is a 1. It's an implied 1. That's called the linear term. We take half of this, square it, and add it right here. That's called completing the square. Okay? And once we have this completed, this resulting trinomial will factor. So we're going to factor it. Take the square root of this one, put it here and here. Then I look for factors of 16. That's numbers that will multiply together to give me 16, and those same numbers will add up to 8. Well, that would be 4 and 4. In order to add up to a positive 8, both of these 4s would have to be positive. So what I wind up with here is a minus 4 times itself. And we often write that as a minus, or I'm sorry, I said a minus 4, a plus 4 times itself. And we often write a plus 4 times itself as a plus 4 quantity squared. And this says complete the square and rewrite as the square of a binomial. So we completed the square, that's this part right here, and then we've rewritten it as the square of a binomial. A binomial is, it has two terms that are separated by either a plus sign or a minus sign. So we have the square of a binomial. I want to point out something to you. You're going to notice this every single time. When I complete the square, I take half of this number and square it and put it here. When I factor this, these numbers that I had to come up with will always be half of the coefficient of the linear term. So you'll see that in this next one. To complete the square, I'm going to take half of this, which is negative 6. I'm going to square it and put that value right here. Well, negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. Now I'm going to factor this resultant or remaining quadratic trinomial. X, the square root of this one here and here. Factors of 36 that will add up to 12 would be 6 and 6. 6 plus 6 is 12. 6 times 6 is 36. And the important thing here is that they have to add up to negative 12. And the only way that can happen is if they're both negative. And here's what I want to point out. These two numbers are exactly half of this. So we take half of this, square it, and put that here. And when I factor it, it'll be half of this number that goes here and here. And we can rewrite it as x minus 6 quantity squared. Half of this number will always be this number right here when we go to write it as the square of a binomial. That's not a coincidence. That'll happen every single time. This is half of 8. Half of negative 12. Okay? So let's take a look at a couple more. This time they're going to be odd. Okay. So I'm going to complete the square. Show you how to do that. If we're going to take half of an odd number, here's the way we do it. It makes life so much easier. Don't use decimals. Square that. That's 11 times 11, which is 121, over 4. 11 times 11 is 121, 2 times 2 is 4. We've completed the square. And now to write this as the square of a binomial, when we go to factor it, take the square root of this one, put it here and here, and we would be looking for factors of 121 over 4 that add up to 11. Well, we could find those eventually, but it's much easier to remember what we recognized up here. The number that we put here and here is going to be half of the coefficient of the linear term. Half of the coefficient of the linear term. Here's the coefficient of the linear term. Half of that is just 11 over 2. Half of anything is that number divided by 2. So I'm going to say 11 over 2. Put that here and here. It would be positive because it's positive. And then to write it as the square of a binomial, anything times itself. Okay? So we found that we completed the square by taking half of 11, which is 11 over 2, squaring it, that's 121 over 4. Then to write this as the square of a binomial, we said, well, the square root of this one here and here, and we took half of this number and put it here and here. Well, half of this number is just 11 over 2. It's odd, so we didn't bother dividing it out. Here it was even, so I took half of 8 and put it here and here. It's just a little pattern that you'll recognize. Let's do one more here with an odd number. I want to complete the square here, so I'm going to take half of 5. There we go, that's all we do to take half of 5, and square that. Well, that'll give me positive 25 over 4. So I've completed the square. Now to write this as the square of a binomial, take the square root of this one, put it here and here. Take half of this number and put it here and here. Half of 5 is 5 over 2. It's negative, so these will be negative. And then we can write it as the square of a binomial just like this. Okay? That's what we're doing. If they're even, if the coefficient of the linear term is even, those are pretty, it's easy to take half of an even number because they divide so easily. But if they're odd, just put a 2 under it. And to complete the square, you square that, multiply it by itself, put a 2 under it, complete the square. And then to write it as the square of a binomial, you take half of this number and put it here and here. Half of this number, put it here and here. Half of any odd number, just put a 2 under it. Half of an even number is easy to do in our heads. Half of this number, put it here and here. Half of this number here and here. These will always multiply together to give you this one and add together to give you this one. Multiply together to give you this one, and they'll add together to give you this one. Likewise, these will add together to give me 11, and they will multiply together to give me 121 over 4. Multiply together to give me this one, add together to give me that one. Multiply together to give me this one, they'll add together to give me that one. Okay? So that's what we're doing. Here's the square of our binomial. And this is the value that completes the square. On a lot of the standardized tests I've taken over the years, they'll just, sometimes the test will just ask you which value will complete the square. That would be this value right here. They'll give you 4 choices, and this would be among them. If they just said, which value completes the square? That's what you get when you take half of the coefficient of the linear term and square it. That's what completes the square. Here, 16 completes the square. 36 completes the square. Half of this squared. So I hope that makes sense. Best of luck.